Hello there, welcome to another video on investing on the stock market. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, which is dividend ETFs. So quickly, first, ETFs are exchange traded funds. So they're just like regular stock funds, but they're cheaper and they're traded on the open stock market. So you don't have to be signed up with a specific company to buy any of these ETFs. They're all traded in the US and they all pay more than 2% dividend. And dividend is obviously interest on your investments. It's a cash payout that you get usually quarterly, so 4 or 5 times a year. Some pay only twice or once a year, and it's a guaranteed income on your investment. So I've done some thorough research and I found the 10 best dividend ETFs in my opinion. And the numbers I'm going to go through are obviously the dividend, the expense ratio, which is how much you have to pay of your total holding every year to the people managing the ETF, exposure, which is what kind of stocks you're buying, payout, which is how often the dividend is paid, and then how many platforms, if any, the ETF is commission free. So this is platforms where you don't have to pay a trading fee. So you don't have to pay the $5 to $7 fee every time you buy or sell, which is quite important actually. If you invest regularly, this is very important as well as this. So without further ado, let's get to it. Now keep in mind, I have chosen different kinds of ETFs. These are not all going to be US ETFs. They're not going to be all broad market ETFs. I've picked out a little bit of everything. So let's get to it. So starting off with my personal favorite of ETFs, period, which is from Vanguard. It's Vanguard High Dividend Yield. It pays 2.84% dividend, very high even for a dividend ETF. It has pretty much the lowest possible expense ratio at 0.08. For some mutual funds and index funds, you have to pay as much as 1 or 2%. It's US broad exposure, so it's mostly from the S&P 500. The payout is quarterly, that's what the Q is for, and it's only commission free through Vanguard. Moving on to probably my second favorite dividend ETF, it's almost the same. It's Schwab Select Dividend, 2.6% dividend, 0.007% expense ratio. The same kind of exposure, so it's pretty much the same companies. It's paid quarterly. So it's great getting your dividend paid every quarter, because if you have a lot of money, you can put that dividend to work already 4 times a year instead of having to wait 365 days. And it's only commission free on Schwab, since Schwab is the actual issuer of the ETF. So moving on to Fidelity's own high dividend value. It's 3.43% dividend, 0.08 expense ratio. This one is a US dividend select, so this ETF only holds companies paying extreme dividend. So you're not going to have a lot of normal companies in this ETF, but there's still big, regular stocks. It's paid out quarterly and it's only commission free on Fidelity's own trading platform. So moving on to another US Select Dividend ETF, 3.07, 0.39% expense ratio, so we're definitely going up here a little bit, and this ETF is definitely inferior to these three, but it's still a broad US ETF. It's US dividend select, but still quite broad, paid out quarterly, and it's commission free on Fidelity's own trading platform. So moving on to Vanguard Developed Market ETF, 2.78% dividend. We're moving outside of the US now, and there's a lot more dividend out there. 0.07, still very, very low. And it's developed markets, so that's mostly countries in Europe, some Japan, South Korea, countries like that. So very stable economies. It's paid quarterly and it's commission free on Vanguard and TD Ameritrade. So this is a great play if you want broad exposure outside of the US. Still a good dividend, still low expense ratio and low risk. Now moving on to some very exciting ETFs, a bit more risk here. Vanguard Emerging Markets, this is the go-to emerging markets ETF, 2.71% dividend, 0.14, which is quite low for emerging markets, because the more riskier, the more emerging the ETF is, the higher the expense ratio. It's emerging markets, so it's mostly Eastern Europe, well, underdeveloped Europe, some South America, and a lot of Asia. So China, India, Mexico, Brazil, countries like this. It's paid out quarterly, but it's free on Vanguard, TD Ameritrade, and First Trade. So great ETF for some more risk. Moving on to the only ETF that I personally hold, it's going to be the most risky one probably. Chinese tech from Global X QQQC, 2.06% dividend, barely making it into this list. 0.65% expense ratio, the most expensive ETF by far, but it's a lot of risk and it's a very niche ETF. It's China tech, so all the big companies, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba, NetEase, you name it. Paid annually, only once a year. I believe it's the 31st of December, the last day. And it's commission free on Interactive Brokers and E-Trade actually. Two big brokers though. Then we're finally moving on to a US tech ETF, which I know a lot of you are going to be excited for. These are not the biggest tech companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, etc. These companies simply don't pay enough dividend. So at least Intel is in here, IBM, companies like that. 2.23% dividend, very high for tech. Tech doesn't pay a lot of dividend. 0.5%, so you have to pay up for this. US tech, broad, it's all sorts of tech companies. Paid out quarterly, and it's not commission free on any trading platforms. Moving on to our last ETF, and sadly the only European one. I'm sorry Europe, I let you down, but you know, there's not too many broad European ETFs, which is kind of weird, but there's a lot of dividend over there. So 2.72% dividend, very high. 0.3, so you have to pay up a little bit in the expense ratio. It's broad Europe, so anything goes. A lot of the companies in Europe pay high dividends, so this is not necessarily Select Dividend. It's paid out quarterly and it's free on Vanguard and Ameritrade. So there you go. Sorry if it's the lines are a bit blurred and it's difficult to see, to follow the ETFs over the whiteboard, but there's a lot of numbers, a lot of text, so I hope you just stuck with it and listened to what I said. These are all great ETFs, but I don't think there's much competition really. If you want to go for the US, you go for these two. If you want to get more international exposure, you go for these two. For Asia, it's IPAC, and then for Europe, it's VGK. So it's pretty clear cut. Now, some of you asked me about extreme dividend. So basically, ETFs paying a monthly dividend, paying like 10%. These are a bit more specialized ETFs. They're called income funds or REITs, so real estate investment trust. I wouldn't personally recommend them. I get that the dividend is very tempting, but these ETFs are designed to, you know, the REITs and income funds, not these. They're designed to stay at the same price and only pay a dividend. So you only get the dividend more or less. So I would suggest going with these, where you get good capital appreciation, so the price going up, and you get the dividend on top, and you get some great companies. ETFs paying more than 3.5% are extreme select dividend ETFs, and they usually only invest in utilities and oil and energy companies. In my opinion, not the best sectors, notoriously risky, and these ETFs almost never go up in price. They go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and they don't change for 10 years. It's pretty much only the dividend is very speculative, so they're more for like swing trading, but if you want to do swing trading, ETFs is not the way. So hope you like this video. Let me know what ETFs you're invested in, which one of these do you think is best. As always, subscribe, drop me a comment, and I'll see you guys in my next video.